The idea for this video comes from a comment a viewer made in the comment section of one of my videos a while ago. In that comment, the viewer suggested that I was prescriptivist in my approach to pronunciation. Now, he was a very nice person, and his comments were polite and supportive, so although I disagreed with him on that point, I didn't feel like that was the time or place to give a lecture about prescriptivism. But it's an interesting topic, one that I think language learners of all levels can benefit from understanding, so that's what we'll talk about in this video. So what is prescriptivism? Prescriptivism is the practice of setting rules for how language should be used. This approach is typically associated with education in one's native language, where teachers insist that students use correct grammar and good pronunciation and avoid slang and that sort of thing. For instance, a middle school language arts teacher in the US might tell her students to use isn't or aren't instead of ain't, because ain't is incorrect, wrong, or sounds uneducated. She might even say it's low class or not a real word. With regard to pronunciation, a middle school language arts teacher might encourage her students to say going and working rather than goin' or workin', using the same sort of justification, that the non-standard pronunciation is wrong. Now, while I absolutely disagree that non-standard forms like these are incorrect or low class or anything like that, I can see that there's a place for prescriptivism in educating native speakers about their own language. The purpose of education in language arts is to prepare students to speak and write in such a way that they present themselves as articulate and competent. For better or worse, society tends to associate standard language use with intelligence and professionalism, and by teaching students to follow the conventions of standard English, educators give them tools to navigate academic, professional, and social environments where these norms are expected and valued. All right, so prescriptivism is about setting rules for how people should speak their native language, and it's generally promoted by educators like language arts teachers. Now, contrary to what a lot of people assume, linguistics is not prescriptivist. In other words, linguistics isn't about identifying correct and incorrect language usage. Instead, linguistics is descriptivist, which means that it's focused on observing and analyzing how people actually use language. It seeks to document patterns, variations, and changes in language without making judgments about whether those forms are right or wrong. So while a middle school language arts teacher might tell her students to avoid ain't and goin', and for some good reasons, a linguist might say, ain't is a long-established feature of non-standard English with historical roots in early English contractions dating back to the 17th century. It's commonly used in informal speech across the United States, including the South, parts of the Midwest, and urban areas like New York City, as well as in regional dialects in England, such as Cockney and Estuary English, and parts of Australia. Ain't is a negative auxiliary replacing forms like isn't, aren't, hasn't, and haven't in various dialects, reflecting systematic rules within those speech communities. Ain't is often negatively stigmatized. Goin' is an example of final G dropping in gerunds, a phonetic phenomenon that occurs in many varieties of English worldwide. In the United States, it's prominent in Southern English, African American Vernacular English, and informal speech across many regions. Beyond the U.S., this feature is also common in working-class dialects in England, such as Cockney and Yorkshire English, as well as in informal Australian and New Zealand English. G-dropping is a phonetic process driven by the efficiency and rhythm of spoken language. Language arts teachers and linguists have different approaches to language because they have different purposes. Language arts teachers want to prepare students to succeed in a world that values and rewards standard language usage as an indicator of education and competence. Linguists describe how people use language without making value judgments. Their goal is to document linguistic diversity, analyze patterns of variation, and explore how language evolves over time, reflecting the cultural, social, and historical contexts of its speakers. How does this apply to foreign language teaching? It's important to understand that the discussion of prescriptivism versus descriptivism, language arts versus linguistics, mostly applies to how we understand, study, and teach our native language, and not really to the field of second language learning. While native speakers must navigate the natural evolution of their language and the balance between formal and informal registers, or prestigious and stigmatized linguistic forms, second language learners necessarily have a different set of goals. For most, it's merely to communicate, and for more advanced learners, to emulate some standard of authenticity as closely as possible. So while from the point of view of linguistics, no naturally occurring dialect or sociolect of a language is worse or better than any other in an absolute sense, the spectrum of how well language learners model their second language does include good, bad, better, and worse. In all of my pronunciation videos, I describe how native Spanish speakers pronounce Spanish sounds, and typical inaccuracies and mispronunciations made by non-native students. As I've discussed in videos where I evaluate people's pronunciation, there are standards by which someone's proficiency in their foreign language can be analyzed and given some kind of numerical rating. Is it prescriptivist to point out that a second language learner isn't speaking her foreign language accurately? No, it isn't. Not by the definition of that word commonly used in linguistics, which relates to setting rules and teaching people about their native language. Imagine the alternative. Imagine a high school or college teacher of Spanish as a second language telling her students that it doesn't matter how they pronounce Spanish sounds. All pronunciations are equally correct. Or no matter how they assemble words into sentences, all constructions are equally good. Or that it doesn't matter what words they choose to use because they all mean whatever they want them to mean. That teacher's students might feel a temporary sense of freedom, relieved of the pressure to adhere to rules or achieve a standard. But they wouldn't actually learn to speak the Spanish language in a way that natives judge as clear or natural, or maybe even intelligible. So on this channel, I often describe how native Spanish speakers speak their language and point out common errors made by second language learners. This is not prescriptivist. If anything, from the standpoint of linguistics, it's descriptivist. I accurately describe the way native Spanish speakers speak their language, and I accurately describe the common mistakes made by non-native speakers. And while it's true that I encourage second language learners to speak in a way that's as similar as possible to how natives speak, this isn't really the same thing as prescriptivism. Now, it would be prescriptivist if I applied value judgments to how native Spanish speakers use their language, which is something I don't do. Quite the opposite, in fact. I love the diversity of Spanish dialects and sociolects, and believe that each one reflects a fascinating cultural and linguistic history. Alright, in this video we've explored the concepts of prescriptivism and descriptivism and how they apply to language arts and linguistics. If you've learned something from this video or enjoyed this discussion, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future content.